Good evening, dear students. I welcome you all to this discussion on SLAT Paper 2 analysis. I welcome you to the YouTube channel of CLATPREP, A Venture of Time. So, if we look at the first impression of this paper, and if we compare it with the paper 1 of SLAT 2025, you'll find that this paper was on a slightly difficult level than compared to the first paper. The first paper, in fact, was easy to moderate. This paper was also can be called as easy to moderate, but the level of difficulty of this paper was slightly higher than the previous paper. Now, if we look at the first impression, if we talk about the first impression, so as I said, overall level of difficulty was slightly difficult as compared to the paper one. There were 60 questions as usual, and you had to answer them in 60 minutes without any negative marking. So in English, there were the overall level of difficulty of English was easy, but it was lengthy. Like just like the previous paper, just like paper one, there were four passages with three questions each, and therefore it was easy, but the length of the passages was lengthy, so therefore it would have consumed a lot of time for the aspirants, right? Similarly, GK in fact was slightly on a difficult note than compared to the last paper one, because there were some questions which were quite tricky in the GK sections. Similarly, legal reasoning was very similar to paper one. It was easy, straightforward, although there were one or two questions here and there which were tricky, especially the questions which did not had the principles. Logical reasoning was again very similar to paper one. Easy questions, very straightforward. Some of the questions were from the critical reasoning section, and other questions were from analytical reasoning section also. Uh, if we talk about AR or analytical reasoning section, there all the 12 questions, almost all the 12 questions, except for one or two, were from the quant part. The other one, two questions were from analytical reasoning. So let's quickly move on to a section-wise analysis of the paper. So as I said, in English, there were four passages with three questions each. The level of difficulty of the English section was easy, but the fact that the paper was lengthy, the fact that the paragraphs were lengthy, in fact, some of these passages were 3 to 4 paragraph long. So therefore, it would have taken a lot of time for you to solve this. Ideally, we take 8 to 10 minutes to solve this section, but considering that it was on a slightly lengthy mode, therefore it would have taken 12 to 13 minutes to solve this section completely. The topics on which the passages were based includes artificial intelligence, gig economy, and insurance. Now, moving to the legal reasoning sections. So as I said earlier, the questions were pretty easy and straightforward. Most of the questions were principal fact based. In fact, there were no legal knowledge, specific legal knowledge questions, or the one-liner legal knowledge question. The topic ranged from contracts to torts, as well as some miscellaneous topics were also touched upon. So there were questions on contracts, culpable homicide, and there were few questions without principle as well. And one such question, which was a bit tricky, was a question on the mortgage. So this question was, in fact, a tricky question. Other than that, most of the questions were pretty easy and straightforward. And considering that these questions were not very lengthy, so it would have taken 8 to 10 minutes to solve this section, right? If we talk about the level of difficulty, the questions were easy and straightforward, though there were few questions which were tricky. Now, this is what makes paper two different from paper one. So, paper one, there were a few questions in paper one which were tricky, especially in the analytical reasoning section and GK section. But in paper two, in almost every section, there were one or two difficult questions, or one or two questions where the students might have faced difficulty in solving those questions. So that's what makes this particular paper a bit more tricky than the first paper. Now coming to the GK section. Now in the GK section, most of these questions were from the static areas, though there was questions from current affairs as well. But there were few random questions. As I said, in this paper, in SLAT 2, some of these questions, in fact, in every subject, there were few questions which were tricky. So even in GK, there were few questions which were tricky. So as I could recall, there was a question on pollutants, the pollutant, which was quite difficult to get, right? And most of these questions, in fact, 7 to 8 questions were from static areas, whereas there were 3 to 4 questions, or in fact 5 questions, which were from the current affairs section. Overall difficulty, I would say the GK section was moderate, considering that there were few tricky questions. Now, moving to the analytical reasoning section. Now, analytical reasoning section was very similar to paper one. This was the only section where I can say that the level of difficulty and the type of questions was exactly same as the paper one. They were all most of these questions were quant based, just as paper one, but there were questions on blood relation as well as missing numbers. So there was a question on missing numbers as well. So around 10 to 11 questions can be said to be of quant, whereas 1 or 2 questions were from analytical reasoning. Level of difficulty, as just like paper one, the analytical reasoning section was moderate in difficulty, but and again it was lengthy. It would have taken around 17 to 18 minutes to get through this section, right? So this is what makes the analytical reasoning section moderate, in my opinion. Coming to the last section, which is logical reasoning. Now, logical reasoning, just like paper one, was very straightforward. It was very easy. Both the questions were very easy, and the type of questions that were asked were also very predictable and was very similar to the paper one. So, if we talk about the topics that were touched upon in this in this paper, there were questions that were asked were from critical reasoning type mostly, and some of these questions were inference based. We also had questions assumption based and conclusion based question, and some questions of strengthening weakening nature, right? Again, level of difficulty was easy and the questions were straightforward. But even in this section, there were 1 or 2 questions which were a bit tricky. So that's what makes this paper, the paper two, makes different from paper one. In paper one, there were few sections which had some tricky questions, but in paper two, in fact, in every section there were 1 or 2 tricky questions here and there. Now, coming to the expected cutoff. Now, because this paper was a little difficult than the paper one, so the cutoff or a projected cutoff to get a call for interview from Symbiosis Pune would be somewhere around 44 to 47. Now, for paper two, there it will be higher. I mean, from 45 to 48. But for paper one, if you're scoring, sorry, for paper one, it will be 45 to 48. But if you're scoring 44 to 47 marks in paper two, then you have a very good chance of getting a call for interview from SLS Pune, which is the best among all these colleges mentioned here, right? For Symbiosis Noida, a score of around 42 to 44 would fetch you a call from Symbiosis Noida for interview. Similarly, for Hyderabad, a score of 40 to 43 would fetch you a call for interview. And for Nagpur, you will require a score of 38 to 40 to get a call for interview. So with this, we end the analysis of SLAT paper. Now, as I said, this paper, if we compare it with the paper one, it was on a slightly difficult note, as there were few tricky questions, in fact, in every section. So I hope your exam went well, and I wish you all the best for all your future endeavors. Thank you.